Ladies and gentlemen, day 16 of the war in West Asia, and there is some relief for India as an LPG tanker called Shivalik, carrying 45,000 metric tons of LPG, has safely crossed the Strait of Hormuz and docked at the Mundra port in India. It happened earlier this evening. Those pictures on your screen should be putting a smile on the face of all citizens this evening. But, ladies and gentlemen, question is what happens to all the other vessels and tankers loaded with the world's energy that are still stuck at the Strait of Hormuz? Well, President Donald Trump has a plan. He hopes to announce a naval coalition of at least 7 countries that will send in their warship to secure Hormuz and unplug the Iran-enforced blockade. Not just his allies in Europe, he wants China to pitch in as well in this endeavor because, well, according to him, 90% of China's fuel flows from the Hormuz. That is, to say the least, a Golgothian exaggeration, but for the moment we will let it go and listen in to what President Trump is saying. Since the soundbite was taken inside Air Force One, it's not very clear, but here it is anyways.
They want to negotiate. They want to negotiate, man. I don't think they're ready. I just don't want them hearing. They want to negotiate, and yes, they should. But I don't think they're ready to do what they have to do. And I think people understand that, and that we will finish the job.
Okay, that wasn't the soundbite we were hoping to put out on air, but essentially what Donald Trump has said is that all NATO allies should come together in a naval coalition and secure the Strait of Hormuz. He's saying China should do it as well. Now, it was clear that Trump wasn't asking, he was demanding and he was threatening. He said if NATO says no, a very bad future lies ahead for them. That, he says, he will remember those who didn't help him today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, China is nowhere a US ally. It is an ally of Iran. Yet, Mr. Trump not just sought China's help, but sent out a veiled threat. If you don't help, I will delay the summit with Xi Jinping that is to be held in Beijing end of this month. But the world has probably had enough of Trump's bullying and tariffs. Most of his allies have said no to his naval coalition plan to secure Hormuz. Boris Pistorius, the defense minister of Germany, summed up the sentiment saying, and I'm quoting him now, "What does Trump expect a handful of European frigates to do that the powerful US Navy cannot do? This is not our war, and we did not start it." UK's Prime Minister said pretty much the same thing. Listen in.
The Strait of Hormuz is then a separate discussion, and it is a discussion. We're not at a point of decisions yet, and I want to really stress that. It is obviously a difficult question, that goes without saying, in relation to how you safeguard maritime traffic through the straits. Everybody knows the geography and the risks, but we are working and discussing that with the US, with Gulf partners and with the Europeans, and I discussed that yesterday with President Trump in the way we often discuss things. So that's where we're at on that. There are no decisions having been made. It'll have to be something which is agreed by as many partners as possible, is my strong view, and we're not at that stage yet, but we are working hard. I discussed it with President Trump yesterday in the way that you would expect between 2 allies, and 2 leaders, and as soon as there's more to report, I will make sure that you have that.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the German defense minister has asked what the world is asking. Where is the mighty navy of the United States? Given that President Trump has said that Iran's entire navy is under the sea and its air force and army are completely depleted, why has the US not sent in its USS Abraham Lincoln strike group to Hormuz? Why is no US naval asset deployed to Hormuz for guard duties? In response, the US has put out the video on your screen saying that Lincoln is sailing close to Iran, not even Hormuz. But US allies are still not convinced. So the question is Trump's naval coalition sinking? My guest this evening for a quick chat, Peter Kuznick, is an author, professor, joining us from the US. Thank you very much. Angie Wong back on the show with us. Hi, Angie. Good to have both of you on the show. Angie, is this embarrassing for the US president? You seek out a naval coalition. You say, look, we are not dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. All of you are, and therefore you should be sending in your naval warships to secure Hormuz. And most of your allies either say no or are non-committal.
I don't think it's embarrassing at all. I mean, look at what the operation actually is. It's taking over Hart Island. And the U.S. cannot take over territory in the Middle East. It's a terrible look. It needs its allies to go in with them so it doesn't look as though this is imperialism. And that is exactly how it's being positioned. Now, I heard one U.S. admiral talk about the Straits of Hormuz and how the waters are not deep enough for some of our major airstrike ships to go near it, which is why they're in other waters. It's just a matter of depth. So smaller boats can go in and help, and I'm sure the U.S. Navy is all over it. But right now, you know, President Trump needs a coalition to go in, and he's testing the waters for NATO and for China for them to give a very public response as to why they cannot go in. That's the positioning they put NATO and China in today.
But Angie, why on earth will China go in? What is their interest?
China should. Well, that's the whole point, right? He knows China is highly unlikely going to be part of this coalition, but he wants the rest of the world to hear the Chinese president say so, to say, well, why can't China be part of this coalition? Well, it's because they have their own special interests.
Peter, would you want to come in here? It is just a question of depth, is what Angie is saying, which is why the mighty U.S. Navy cannot sail anywhere near Hormuz. Otherwise, you know, the fleet would have been there.
Trump knows that the war is incredibly unpopular here in the United States, and that the Europeans all know it's an illegal, immoral war. They don't want to get involved. You know, this is President Bone Spurs. This is a man who supported the Vietnam War, but got a doctor to get him out of the war. This is a family that's never gone to war. They're a family of cowards, but they want to call on others to do their dirty work for them. There was a popular song in the U.S. some years ago, "Take this job and shove it." Well, the Europeans and the other U.S. allies are saying to Trump, take this war and shove it. We're not going to be part of this anymore. There's a certain level of morality, and you need a certain level of popular support before you do this. Trump knows, and they all know, that the Iranians, even if their capabilities have been degraded by this constant U.S. and Israeli pummeling, still can take out ships in the Strait of Hormuz. And if Trump knows that if more U.S. servicemen get killed, or if a U.S. ship is hit in that region, his tiny support that he has is going to evaporate. And so he's scared. He doesn't want to do this. He's calling on others. After he bragged on how powerful the U.S. Navy is and the U.S. military, this coward is calling on others to do the U.S. fighting. It's like somebody getting into a schoolyard fight and punching somebody, then calling his friends to come in and clean it up for him. This is the kind of bullying cowardice, and nobody wants to be part of this except for Netanyahu. Bibi the Butcher loves this, but the other leaders of the world are sick of it, and they're sick of Trump's bullying, and they're sick of his threatening to invade Greenland, and they're sick of what he did in Venezuela, and they're not going to be part of it.
Okay.
That's, you know, the situation.
Angie, look at what the German defense minister is saying, essentially saying that this is not our war. We didn't start it. So if the U.S. goes into a war, starts bombing Iran, doesn't let any of, doesn't beforehand tell their NATO allies or any allies across the world, why are you even expecting your allies to step in and help? I mean, if you're saying we are only doing it for them because China's energy flows through here and Europe's energy flows through the Strait of Hormuz, leave the Strait of Hormuz unprotected. They can deal with it the way they want to. China is dealing with it pretty well. They have an agreement with the Iranians. The Iranians are letting their ships pass.
Yes, and I'm happy to hear that India had its first oil tanker passed earlier today. And I'm sure Iran is also doing the same for their friends in China. So, you know, Europeans have a really strange position right now, including Germany, who receives a lot of their oil from the Straits of Hormuz. Are they going to be with the U.S. or are they going to be with Iran? That is the position Trump has put everyone in right now. That's not bullying. That's to see everyone's true colors. This is all by design. You may see it as an emotional bullying like you would in grade school, but that's not what this is. This is about positioning everybody to seeing where everyone stands in the world alliance.
But why would you expect NATO, or why would you expect your European allies to get involved in this war and send in their warships? For what joy? Now, President Trump has, for the last 15 days, been saying that Iran's navy has been sunk. It is lying somewhere under the sea. Their entire air power has been depleted. They have no army to speak of. There is no leadership. It's completely gone finished. If that is the case, if that is the situation and that is the case, there would be no danger on the Strait of Hormuz. Are we to understand that when he seeks out help and sends out this SOS, he's accepting that Iran's military prowess is very much alive and kicking and giving it back to them, which is why he needs the help?
No, not at all. In fact, it was the IRGC who's limiting their missile use. We're seeing a very large daily reduction of how many missiles they're using. And that tells us, that signals to us that they are being depleted of their supply. Now, the U.S. Navy can go in and finish this job. But as I said earlier, we want our allies involved in this. We do not want this to be a U.S.-controlled territory. That's a terrible look for us. We want our European allies there. We want our Asian allies there to do this together, because this is a worldwide coalition. Most of the world depends on the oil coming from this region. They have vested interest. Now, President Trump wants to see who wants this oil and who is going to go against him. That is what I've seen over and over again in my years of covering President Trump. He always positions everyone to see their true colors.
Okay. Peter, would you want to respond to that?
Well, Angie's giving them the benefit of the doubt. She's assuming that Trump went into this with a plan beyond bombing. If you look at the people around him, the Stephen Millers, the Hegseths, the Rubios, these are not planners. They're not strategists. They don't have the usual procedures for deciding on things. He didn't include the allies before he got into this. He relied on Netanyahu and Netanyahu's intelligence. Rubio says the U.S. got involved because Israel was going to do it, and then U.S. sites in the region would have been vulnerable. So he didn't involve them. He didn't plan. What Witkoff said was that when they put all those military forces in the region, they expected Iran to cave in just to that. Well, they were surprised, he said, when they didn't. The Iranians are a long civilization, a proud civilization. They've got a lot of military assets. They had hundreds of thousands of drones. They have tens of thousands of missiles, and they've got real capabilities. Trump knows that. Trump lies all the time about how great the U.S. is doing. Well, we can blow things up. Yes, the U.S. has the ability to blow things up, but the U.S. is an international rogue state. It's an international pariah. Nobody wants to get involved. They say the U.S. is radioactive. It's toxic. And they're keeping their distance now. So Trump is threatening them. He's threatening now he's not going to go to China. He's raising the possibility. Now he's going to remember that all these NATO allies, when they want something from the United States, he's going to remember how they didn't come to U.S. support. There's no reason. And if they did, there would be so much opposition in their own countries like there is in the U.S.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, and what Iran has said is that only the ships from Israel and the U.S. and those who support the U.S. will be blocked in the Strait of Hormuz, that other ships can get through. And now we're seeing with the Indian vessels, and we're going to see it with others as well. The Chinese ships have been going through already, as have some of the others who are not hostile to Iran.
Which is why, again, the question, why would anyone want to get involved? We'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much, Peter and Angie, for joining us and giving us these differing points of views. It's always important in a show. Thank you very much. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm stepping into a quick break. There's more on the other side. Do stay with us.